From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We begin in Moscow tonight, where President Gorbachev and President Yeltsin have found out something that American presidents learn on the very first day in office. Congresses are unpredictable. Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Yeltsin urgently want the Congress of People's Deputies to approve in a hurry a new political and economic structure for the Soviet Union before there's any more chaos. There was supposed to be 2 days of debate, and then Congress would vote today. It didn't. One angry deputy said, "How can we be expected to raise our hands and vote on the end of our country?" Maybe tomorrow. In Moscow, ABC's Jim Laurie.
It was a day of confusion and frantic maneuvering in the Soviet Congress. While delegates gave preliminary approval to a radical plan to transfer most Kremlin power to the republics, they failed to provide the two-thirds vote needed for a law to form a new government. Delegates demanded more debate. For one thing, Russian deputies want more seats for Russia than any other republic in the future parliament. Mikhail Gorbachev, despite the backing of Boris Yeltsin, was unable to control the session.
Look how big is disarray. There's no agreement on any single point.
There were many problems. Hardliners like Colonel Viktor Alksnis mobilized nearly 400 votes to try to block change. And deputies have not yet addressed the most critical issue, a new economic framework spelling out central versus republic control.
Nothing concrete about future economic structure.
Much of the day was spent off the floor of Congress lobbying for votes or working deals behind closed doors. Delegates argued they were the guardians of the nation's constitution and should not surrender their powers. And more resistance to change, according to Delegate Vitaly Korotic, came from those who feared losing the perks that come with their jobs.
And being in parliament, it means you have some privileges. Free tickets, 300 rubles and 300 for your aid, or something.
The Congress was elected more than 2 years ago, and it now finds itself out of step. So the haggling continues tonight, the Congress to reconvene tomorrow for an unscheduled fourth day. But most believe Gorbachev and the ever more powerful Republic leaders will get their way. Jim Laurie, ABC News, Moscow.
Now that the People's Congress has gone on an extra unscheduled day, guess what's been postponed another day? Now we expect Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Yeltsin to join us tomorrow night for a national town meeting. Confirmation today that Secretary of State Baker will visit the Baltic states next week, the first visit by an American Secretary of State since the Soviets took over the Baltics before World War II. Mr. Baker will also go to Moscow to explain, he said, to Soviet leaders the principles of U.S. policy towards the Soviet Union in the wake of the failed coup against Mr. Gorbachev. In Washington tonight, ABC's John McWethy.
Secretary Baker said it is up to the Soviet people to decide what kind of government they end up with.
I'm not picking and choosing between 15 separate republics, a loose confederation of sovereign states, a firm, strong central union. It's not up to us to make these determinations. We're going to deal with reformers in the Soviet Union wherever we find them.
Baker hinted if individual republics move faster on economic reform than Moscow does, then the Bush administration will deal with those republics and bypass Moscow. On nuclear weapons, the secretary said the U.S. will urge the Soviets to maintain some kind of central control over who has authority to fire them.
It would be probably on balance best if not necessarily that they ended up all in one republic, but that they ended up under one central command authority.
Things are changing so rapidly in the Soviet Union that Baker is not at all sure what he will find when he gets there or who will be in charge. One indication of the uncertainty at Baker's press conference today, the name Mikhail Gorbachev never came up. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
In a moment, we'll have the other news. A new political ad takes the low road on a Supreme Court nomination. On the American agenda, universal health care. How the Germans do it. And a new guide for commuters searching for the perfect shortcut.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Just for Men Hair Color.
In Washington, the political battle over an office that is supposed to be above politics. 1 week before the confirmation hearings begin for Judge Clarence Thomas, nominated to the Supreme Court, some of his most conservative supporters have paid for a television ad that has set Washington's teeth on edge. President Bush and Judge Thomas himself have denounced it. At the White House first, here's ABC's Britt Hume.
The ad is a bare-knuckled attack on the ethics of 3 Senate liberals thought likely to oppose Judge Thomas.
Ted Kennedy, suspended from Harvard for cheating, left the scene of the accident at Chappaquiddick where Mary Jo Kopechne died, and this year, Palm Beach. Joseph Biden, found guilty of plagiarism during his presidential campaign. Alan Cranston, implicated in the Keating 5 SNL scandal.
Judge Thomas has condemned the ad, calling it vicious. And this morning, President Bush was asked about it at the start of a cabinet meeting.
Clarence Thomas himself spoke very clearly on that. So you see these things from time to time that are totally counterproductive and on all sides of the political spectrum. That one was not a good ad.
Would you urge them to not run it?
Yeah, I'd urge them to not run it.
The conservative activists who are running it, though, made clear they're unlikely to be moved by such an appeal.
The White House didn't ask us to launch this campaign. We didn't run this by the White House, and we're not answering to the White House.
What makes the matter touchy for the White House is this celebrated 1988 political ad the same conservative activists ran on their own. It showed the picture and thus the race of the furloughed Massachusetts prisoner Willie Horton. The Bush campaign in separate ads also made Horton and his furlough an issue against Michael Dukakis, but didn't show his face or mention his race. The Bush campaign tried to distance itself from that racial Horton ad 3 years ago, but critics have long insisted Mr. Bush benefited from it and privately approved of it. The charge infuriates the president, but this new ad already has some Democrats saying the same thing. Britt Hume, ABC News, the White House.
4 years ago, after Judge Robert Bork's nomination to the Supreme Court was rejected by the Senate, Mr. Bork warned that the process of choosing Supreme Court justices was in danger of becoming politicized, and the court itself, he said, could be severely damaged. As ABC's Jeff Greenfield reports tonight, at least part of that prediction appears to be fulfilled by this ad.
Who will judge the judge? How many of these liberal Democrats could themselves pass ethical scrutiny?
The reason this ad is running in 1991 is because this ad ran back in 1987.
Robert Bork wants to be a Supreme Court justice, but the record shows that he has a strange idea of what justice is.
This new ad, say its sponsors, was designed to tell liberals that this sort of attack on a conservative nominee this time would not go unanswered.
I go back to the Judge Bork hearings, and I ask about the integrity of those hearings. And what I'm saying is that if they're going to play hardball, we're going to play hardball.
One problem with the ad is that, as of now, even Clarence Thomas's strongest supporters have detected no sign of hard-nosed attacks against him.
I think members of the Senate will judge Clarence Thomas on his merits. I would hope that one thing that might come of this is that all of us would tell ourselves that advertising should not be part of a Supreme Court campaign.
Another question, is it hardball or mudball? We showed the commercial to Roger Ailes, George Bush's media advisor, who is no stranger to the world of rough-and-tumble politics.
It seems strange for me to say this, but I actually think it's probably unfair to the Democrats in terms of the use of headlines. And it's just heavy-handed. I think it can turn people off.
But for all the criticism, the ad's creators have apparently achieved one goal. They publicized this campaign with a news release and a press conference. And thanks to news reports like this one, these ads have reached an audience hundreds of times bigger than the one the advertisers paid for. Jeff Greenfield, ABC News, New York.
In medical news, doctors have discovered a clue that may lead to saving thousands of children's lives. About 4,000 babies are born prematurely every year. Doctors may soon be able to predict which ones. Here's ABC's George Strait.
Debbie Cologne has to be fed through a tube. She weighed only 2.5 pounds when she was born 6 weeks premature. Doctors say she'll be okay, but 30,000 preemies die every year in this country, and thousands more are left permanently handicapped. Most premature deliveries are a surprise to doctor and mother.
There were no warnings at all. Half of all women, at least, and maybe closer to 70% of all women who are going to deliver preterm, we can't detect. And that's a really glaring problem.
Doctors at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York believe they have a test that can predict which women are likely to deliver prematurely. Those women secrete a special protein through their cervix, which can be identified with the new and relatively simple lab test during their second and third trimester.
But at least we've identified these women. Then we hope that we can bring to bear various different therapies that will prevent the preterm delivery.
Within a year, the test is expected to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration and be available for only $25. The test has the potential to dramatically reduce the cost of premature deliveries, which is enormous, $10 billion a year. And it could reduce the U.S.'s infant mortality rate, which is currently the highest in the industrialized world. George Strait, ABC News, Washington.
Other news, the author and actor Thomas Tryon has died. He was an actor first. His biggest part was the title role in the movie The Cardinal. Later, he turned to writing such bestsellers as The Other. He was 65 when he died today of cancer. And the country singer Dottie West died today. She was in a car accident last week, as you may know. She was 58. Country Sunshine was one of her hits, and so is this one.
Here comes my baby back again.
Here Comes My Baby won her country music's first Grammy for a female vocalist back in 1964. We'll be back in just a moment. In South Africa today, President de Klerk has proposed a new constitution that would, for the first time, give black South Africans the right to vote. But there would be no majority rule if they won the election. Here's ABC's Don Cladstrup.
In unveiling his party's plan for a new constitution, de Klerk was emphatic about one point. We are certainly not prepared to exchange one form of domination for another, he said. Black domination is as unacceptable as white domination. De Klerk's plan would give blacks the vote, but deny outright power to any one group. It would scrap the position of state president and replace it with a collective presidency in which power would be shared by the leaders of the three biggest parties, black or white. Much of the real power will rest in the lower house of Parliament, where all political parties will have equal representation, no matter how big or small. That means the tiniest white party would have the same political muscle as the biggest black one. That, says the ANC, is a recipe for disaster.
People whose policies have no appeal in the society will have the right to veto any legislation that comes out. That disables the whole idea of a democratic government.
But if the ANC is upset with de Klerk's plan, white conservatives like it even less, especially here, in Ventersdorp. It was in Ventersdorp 2 weeks ago that hardline conservatives battled police in an effort to prevent de Klerk from speaking, where today, many are convinced he is leading the country to ruin.
He's selling out the white of South Africa. Even not selling it out, he's giving it away.
What's going to happen is we're not going to have a blood flow between black and white. I think we're going to have a blood flow between white and white.
President de Klerk reminded his opponents today that he would not be intimidated, knowing full well that his proposal for a new constitution is just the opening gambit in what promises to be a long and difficult negotiating process. Don Cladstrup, ABC News, Ventersdorp.
Still overseas in Beijing today, 3 members of the U.S. Congress who are fighting for trade sanctions against China unless the country improves its human rights record had a run-in with police. They had just unfurled a banner in Tiananmen Square honoring those who died during the pro-democracy demonstrations 2 years ago when the police ordered them to stop. The members of Congress stopped. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrials lost about 9 points to close at 3,008. The trading was moderate. In Houston, Texas today, a 15-year prison term for Wanda Holloway. She is the woman convicted yesterday for plotting to kill the mother of her daughter's rival school cheerleader in the hopes the daughter would be rattled, drop out, and her own daughter would then get the job as cheerleader. When we come back, the American agenda, health care in America, and what the U.S. might learn from the Germans.
Athlete's foot.
We have put the issue of how to pay for health care on the American agenda again tonight. With more than 30 million Americans uninsured and another 60 million who don't always have enough insurance, there's been a good deal of debate about whether to move in the direction of a system such as the one they have in Canada, where the government picks up the bill for everybody. But as the Canadian system is now widely regarded to be unrealistic for the U.S., A congressional study group has also gone to Europe. This report by our medical editor Tim Johnson documents what they are finding in Germany.
On the surface, it looks like the United States. A patient chooses a private doctor, makes an appointment for a consultation, goes to the office for an examination and tests using modern equipment, after which the doctor bills the patient's insurance fund for his services. But even though the U.S. and Germany have many similar elements in their healthcare systems, they also have important differences because of markedly contrasting social philosophies, at least when it comes to healthcare. 67-year-old Wilfred Thiele, a retired widower who lived for several years in the United States, describes the German commitment to provide health care that includes everyone.
Well, my feeling is that it's a closely knit system and nobody falls through it.
Health economist Uwe Reinhardt of Princeton, who is advising the American congressman in Germany this week, says that Germans would never accept millions of their countrymen not having health insurance.
We accept this in this country. A German would consider that inhuman, unacceptable, asocial.
This determination to provide health care for all has produced a system of more than 1,100 insurance funds which are financed by taxes on both employers and employees. Germans join a fund early in life and can stay with it for the rest of their lives regardless of their job, age, or changing health conditions. And despite this coverage for everybody, Germany has managed to control healthcare costs far better than the U.S. Specifically, in 1989, Germans spent 8.2% of their gross national product on healthcare versus 11.8% in the U.S. and $1,232 per person versus $2,354 per person. So how do the Germans do it? Despite surface similarities to the U.S., in Germany, the government plays a much stronger role.
Once a year, all the stakeholders in healthcare must meet in Bonn and hash out roughly by how much health spending should increase in the coming year, how much doctors should get, and hospitals and so on.
For German doctors, this amounts to something that U.S. doctors have traditionally opposed, a ceiling or cap on costs.
They simply told physicians, as a group, you're going to get so much money in the coming year, and you have to live with this. And if you do more, your fees go down proportionately. That's the expenditure target. They actually did it.
But this system of caps is not without problems. Since their fees have been lowered, German doctors often try to see more patients to make up for lowered fees, which often means they spend less time with patients.
Are you saying that you think doctors make too little money for what they do in this country?
In general, yes. We are urged to work in a hurry, and that's bad.
Despite these problems, there is a big plus for doctors in Germany. Unlike doctors in the U.S., whose decisions are increasingly questioned by insurance companies, German doctors still can decide what to do for the patient without being second-guessed. It is this freedom and the right to be part of the process that determines how the healthcare system works that appeals to many American doctors.
It's not so much that we favor the German system as we favor the German process, where the medical profession has a true negotiating partnership with its federal government.
The Germans seem to have figured out how to provide insurance for everybody, yet control costs by negotiating fees. The American congressional delegation wants to learn more about how such negotiations work and whether that process might be the next significant German import. Dr. Timothy Johnson, ABC News, Boston.
One note this evening about healthcare and ethics. Recently on the American agenda, we reported on doctors who have a potential conflict of interest. Those who send their patients out for tests conducted at medical centers where the doctors are owners. Now the American Medical Association is warning those doctors to tell their patients when they have such financial arrangements. We'll have our final report in a moment. If you thrive on baseball statistics, get out your erasers. Roger Maris's record of 61 home runs in a season has always been followed by an asterisk in the record books because the season was longer than when Babe Ruth hit his 60. But by that logic, all sorts of records should be questioned, and so today the Statistical Committee gave Maris the home run record free and clear. Our final story tonight ought to strike a sympathetic note with anyone who's just fought rush hour traffic on the way home. Not surprisingly, it comes to us from Los Angeles, where the automobile is still often the commuter's only choice, which is why drivers are always looking for a better route, even if it leads through somebody else's front yard. Here's ABC's Brian Rooney.
Another day on the freeway in Los Angeles. Traffic is bad and getting worse. Down at the Department of Transportation Nerve Center, the red lights are going on all over the map.
Now, all lanes are shut down, and traffic is now backed up quite heavily on the Harbor Freeway southbound from as far back as Slauson.
Down there, a lot of drivers are thinking, there's got to be a better way.
We have a saying, when the going gets tough, the tough make two rights, a left, and a U-turn through a mini-mart parking lot.
Brian Roberts and Richard Schwadell wrote a whole book of L.A. shortcuts. Shortcuts with names like the Airport Run and 2 to Toluca.
The object is to get there quicker so you have more time to stand in line at the bank.
Residents in the shortcut neighborhoods are upset. Al Deitch says the L.A. shortcut book has so many people rushing up his street, he can hardly get his car out of the driveway.
It's not from the residents of this neighborhood, it's from people looking for shortcuts to get to where they have to go.
Some local governments have erected barriers to stop commuters. In this neighborhood, the cars went right through the barriers, so they're putting a speed bump in every block.
We have people screaming up and down the street, not observing stop signs, almost slamming into us when we're pulling in and out of where we live.
But you have to wonder about these angry people who don't like other drivers going through their neighborhood. How do they get where they're going? Our friend Al Deitch, for instance. Al waits until 9 when traffic is slower, then he heads for a little street off Mulholland where he knows a good shortcut through someone else's neighborhood. Brian Rooney, ABC News, Los Angeles.
That's our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.